is where the sadness is when I said this hatred and mistrust is manufactured through these discourses. It is not given and natural.
How do you view the state government's role in the whole crisis that has unfolded?
Oh, that's less said the better. They have failed terribly. There is a multi-layered failure. This thing has been developing for some time now. I mean, forget about the larger, I have told you the historical background, the divide based on force categories and narratives, and the competitive politics of the post-colonial democratic politics have accentuated that competitions, and as a vested interests have crafted Meitei as the enemy and the Kukis as the enemy, Naga as the enemy. That has been played out and deepened. I have seen young people in their 20s, how much they hate Meiteis, or in the recent times again, how much they hate the Kuki now. This violence is an indicator of that manufactured mistrust, manufactured hatred. You must not forget that this hatred and mistrust is not natural. It is not given. It is manufactured through academic discourses, through popular media discourses, including social media, and including on religious places of, weekly gatherings of this hatred and mistrust has been generated. And this burst of violence is because of that. And to the best of my knowledge, I know how many of the people in the hills looked at Meiteis in that term. But rarely I have encountered Meiteis that deep sense of mistrust and hatred. But this time, in the last 1 or 2 years, I can sense this. So this reactive nature is now also manufactured and supported continuously for the last 2 years. That's why far more than the transformation among the Kukis, it is a transformation of the Meiteis which will produce a different kind of a consequences, a different kind of a political landscape and political ethos. And the consequence of that is something that I feel pretty worried about this for the people in that part, especially for the minorities. I must tell you that I have lobbied with Sri Ibobi's government more than 10 years ago. I said, this Manipur issue with the tribal assemblies in what we call in social science politics of redistribution. They are not getting what their due shares. It could be material goods, services. It's not being governed. I said, do something like a Sajjar committee and check where is the socio-economic standing of different communities in the state. And then point out what the loopholes, and then so that corrective measures can be done. And also importantly, this propagandist blaming of the communities, you will have a better discourse, of a platform to talk more objectively to correct things. This is what I have pushed to that government. They didn't implement. And the present government, in its first term, I have lobbied with this government, the chief ministers. I said, please do something like this, because the propaganda and vested interests are using this discourse of discrimination and resources to serve the communal sectarian politics rather than actually solving the problem. They refuse. And then I started thinking, is it against the interests of the political class to institute such a committee?
Yeah.
I started thinking like that. And I'm so sad that these scholars don't think about it. You must remember this. This is politics of recognition and politics of redistribution, we call it. Manipur's grievances is not that their language is going to be destroyed by the Meiteis. It's not, because in all their radio stations and cultural, this intact. The languages are intact, and that's the major chunk is the complaint is on the redistribution. And there are structural issues, policy matters, the political ethos of the nature of the state, nature of the political economy of the state, rather than looking at these things. Meiteis is the one, Meitei is the one, we're doing it. Incidentally, every election time they will bring it up. So say just before this present government election in last year, just before that, this thing came up in the assembly saying that this budgetary allocation is less, blah blah blah, and in reaction the government put up a 2 page or 3 page. It's a knee-jerk reactive response. I have lobbied with this government as well as lobbied with the earlier government of Sri Bobi. I met them, the CM I met them, both the CM, and I said, please do something like this so that we can take corrective measures and also help us to divert from this communal sectarian propaganda and using community as a template, diverting the whole issues. Then I realized that this politician refused to do it because I began to think that it hurts their interests itself. Publicly it is, I have told them also in this present CM, in a public conversation I had it there also, I said, why don't you do this? Instead of doing that, had they done it, this crisis also about discrimination we don't get, you must have heard about it. Why you don't do this? This is more than 10 years ago. I said, please do something like this. They didn't do it. So I think whether it is tribal politicians or a Meitei politician or a Pangal, which is a Muslim, they belong to the same class of people. They want to play with people's emotion. They want to play the sectarian politics, and so that they gain access continuously to the wealth and the power of the state in our democratic setup. So people are being used, and this violence, according to me, is that this political class have bitten more than they could chew. They play the game. Remember in 2001 crisis, it is a squabbling in the government where this trying to unsettle and crisis among the political elected legislature, then the boom, that crisis happened. And this time, I'm not surprised, this spark happened when there was a crisis within the ruling government about not getting access to this. I think the welfare of the state, of the people, is not the priority despite their political rhetorics. If they had it, they would have done this to stop this committee and form it, and the problem is that including the civil society don't argue like this. A knee-jerk reaction of 2 page response to that accusation of budgetary allocation mistakes. It could have been done as systematic. I said on the line of the structure, please do it for every community where we find mistakes, what are the loopholes in the or bottlenecks in development. It should be a platform for public to take part. You are keeping it a void, and vested interests and sectarian politics is filling it with false narrative about blaming each other, and that is the crux of the problem that Manipur has. And I wish these scholars from every community, instead of talking about the sectarian communal terms, they must articulate this rational, objective agenda. When they unite, these grievances of the people will go.
Class to play one community against another rather than take responsibility for the welfare of all people, right? The state government, to contain the violence that is currently happening in Manipur, they have also given shoot at sight orders in cases of extreme violence. Do you think that is a wise move on their part?
Shoot at sight is the magnitude of the violence. I think government is compelled to do that one because you have to control this violence. It is going out of hand. Would that get it? So I think it is the state's responsibility to do it. But I think they could have avoided these things had they been a little more proactive before. There is a series of things that were done. I think once these things, my suggestion is that there must be a thorough a judicial inquiry headed by a judge of the Supreme Court, not High Court. Must do inquiry commission must be set up to see the chain of events and fix responsibility and accountability for these events. Because there are many things that the state have failed. They knew that this since the forest evictions and ST, all these things have been brewing up, and this social media, and this has been building up for some time, besides the decades-old narrative. So it is going on different things. And then the intelligence department You have for every intelligence input, was there an intelligence input that such a violence might happen on third? When this really happens, do they know that this violence will happen? If this happened in Churanchandpur or in Moreh, will it have a reaction from the valley? This intelligent input and the basic policing, you have IPS officers and MPS officers, highly educated, coveted posts and positions, and then you have not been able to control it. So, are you taken by surprise? They're saying that. Why should you be taken by surprise? You know, evictions and church, these issues, false narrative or otherwise, that has been building it up. And the government should have been more proactive. The thing is that, you know, there seems to be more than meets the eye. As far as, I've heard about police officers taking prior chutti, and the vice president on whether the timing of the violence and why is that the security lapse, is there in the reported intelligence report? If not, what happened to our intelligence unit? If there was a report from the intelligence about a likely violence, did you act upon those reports? One must fix responsibility for this, because you don't need this suit aside. If you have done that, it will not be required. It will not happen. Isn't it? So then, you know, it's understood with that kind of attention, this is bound to happen. So a complete failure. And it is sad to see the politicians were not issuing appeal. If they care for their people, if they think, if this violence doesn't benefit them, then they would, I suppose, have come out and stopped this violence. If they love the lives of these innocent people. It shuddered to think me of young girls and boys who are doing educations, running health, whichever communities. For no reasons people are being killed. Why? Because you belong to X group, Y group. What is state for? What is our civilized, organized life for? Neither you counter those propaganda, neither you take up this step. So I was asking, what's going on? So I think your question of should that side is appropriate or not. That is, given that situation, that is, almost like a point of inevitable sort of a position. Once this thing subsides, the tragedy you see is only the ordinary people will suffer. And my fear is that even this ordinary people's suffering will still be utilized to pursue politics by some people. And I would appeal to the people that don't allow anybody to use your tragedy to be a political tool for somebody's benefit.
How do you view the central government's role? Has it done enough to intervene and resolve the conflict? Not just now, but also historically.
Yes, in that sense, this is, many of these issues is also part of what I will call it a counterinsurgency politics. Many of this conflict is a part and parcel of counterinsurgency strategies. It's very clear to me on that. You ask any people who have done studies and observed this, that not every 35, 40s armed groups are rooted in historical and political agenda of this one. Not everybody can be clubbed like that. And the mushrooming of these armed groups over the decades, why it has happened? And one must ask these questions. So, and pitting one community against the other, is it a part of counterinsurgency measures? These are questions to be answered. So in that sense, Government of India's policies, you must think about it. If they put their foot down on sectarian politics, have taken a firmer decision on that, rather than keeping it hanging in the air, you can't push this kind of a communal sectarian politics. If they have done it rather than entertaining here and there and pitting one another, I suspect that there is some issues around that as far as the Government of India's response to it over the years, historically if you speak. But in the present case, I think the Government of India is doing what it ought to have done. It is expected to do. I mean, people say Article 355 has been invoked. I keep on hearing this among the newspaper writing and so on, but this guy, Kuldeep Singh, the former DG of CRPF, who has been appointed, he says that Article 355 is not invoked. I saw leading journalists from the mainstream or from the state keep on saying that this has been invoked. And it's an unprecedented, rarest of the rare kind. And I don't think so. Now that Kuldeep Singh has said it is not invoked. But the army has been called out. In army's position is quite strong in this part, as part of half spies around. And I think they should have reacted. Unfortunately, now there are accusations against Assam Rifles of being biased towards one community, others, that has come up in the news report. And these matters should be looked into it by the central government, because these troops are under their command. But by and large, I think in this present crisis, not in the historical sense, I think the government has done what is expected of it, but they could have done more, because in that, the violence, I don't know why they have taken a little longer to crack down, though they have airlifted CRPF, but you have military columns and others. This is what happened to these police? I think I'm saying it, that there must be a commission of inquiry headed by either a sitting judge or a retired judge of the Supreme Court. That's what I think one should be done. See, at the end of the day, whether you take a political posture here and there, everybody wants peace. And even the violence, even if it will take longer to heal, but there must be an effort, because this fight will only invite external forces to get involved in the local politics, whether all this tribal or the non-tribal, whatever. Your own capacity to deal with your own issues will go out of your hand. Somebody from without, from the external, will dictate, do this. So your own self-agency to deal with your life, to define your life, will be jeopardized. And I hope, whether you are coming from AC, ST, OBC, Meitei, non-Meitei, people in that state must think about this. Are they ready to lose their own self-agency to define and manage their affair, or allow the door to be open to be dictated by external forces? It's a serious. At the end of the day, Meiteis is not going to disappear. Tangkhuls are not going to be disappeared. You can't shake these pieces of land from here and there and bring in Tripura in between. You can't do it. You are just as, existentialists have this saying, we are condemned to freedom. So you are condemned to make choices for your own better negotiation with your own life, who reside in that tiny mountainous regions. You are forced to dividing it continuously over the years. Colonial forces have called you civilized and uncivilized, forgetting that your boundary is, like Sudipto Kabira says, it's a fuzzy boundary before the colonial period. Post-colonial state has deepened that schism. Competitive democratic politics have exploited. Armed insurgency and nationalist politics have used this division rather than getting a synergy. Now the globalizations, global capital and forces coming in, you will be swept off when you're fighting with each other, and then external forces will deciding if your cookie do like this, Meitei will do like this, then Meitei you should be doing like this, align with us. You lose your freedom at the end of the day. I hope better sense prevail. If you have lived together like this, it's time for us to reverse this process. And I think that's a desired thing. I mean, if they can't do it, they will be condemned to live 1,000 years of conflict among themselves.
One of the flashpoints in the current conflict has also been that places of worship have been attacked. Is there a communal or religious angle also to the current crisis in Manipur?
Involvement of religious angle in the crisis or not is depends on how we look at it. At one level, in any kind of communally organized violence, every aspect of your being, religion being one of them, is bound to be implicated in some sense. For example, churches are being burned down. It is not the only one. There has been a precedence to that one. During even that crisis in the 90s, same thing will happen. But in this case, in the last 2-3 years, some of the deeply held sacred sites of the Meiteis have been vandalized or desecrated. And there's something called Kalbu and Thangsing. Even time and again has been attacked and vandalized. And that resentment is there. If you look in the newspapers, you will see. So Meiteis have felt deeply about this because it is deeply related to their origin myths, their religious beliefs. Not only their very, as I say, their origin myth is implicated in these sites. These what can be called pre-Vaishnavite sites. Even when they were converted into Vaishnavisms, across spectrums, Meiteis still hold these places as very sacred, and it's a crucial part of defining who they are. And these were vandalized before. So before the church, one has to think about it. So there is a deep resentment about this among the Meiteis, cutting across religious affiliations, including Meiteis Christians in some sense will have, you can call it deep inside them, despite the evangelist Abrahamic religion's notion of the other religion as the false god and so on and so forth. But in that sense, attack on these things. So I can very well understand with churches it becomes a target. But there is also an additional thing that I am seeing this time, that churches are being burned down not only of these cookies, but that of the churches belong to the Meiteis themselves. So in that sense, that is what I'm saying, that this violence is going to reconfigure the alignment that Meiteis in general think about it, so how it gets implicated in the larger political spectrum of South Asia and India in general, in particular, and that realignment will have a serious implications, and I am not sure how many of these people are aware of this transformation to this community, which is the majority community, whether they will still talk about peaceful coexistence, how they're going to look as these things unfolded and these other elements started getting involved. People used to think about the international Christians sort of lobbies and backgrounds, which we have heard about it for decades, but you were seeing barely, you never heard about external elements of that kind. But this is a turning point. I could see glimpses and elements of external mobilizations which is coming in to define their character, and that realignment will have a serious implications. That's what I am afraid of that one. But definitely this violence will be transformative, and it will be bad for the population in the state in general, but the minorities' experience with this transformed Meiteis is anybody's case now.
So, as you mentioned that, and as our research shows that newspapers are talking of the current conflict in terms of hill tribes and the valley people. But there have been earlier instances of violence in Manipur, and they did not follow the similar line. For example, in 1992, there was conflict between the Naga tribes and the Kuki tribes. So how is the current crisis different from what happened earlier? Like, how's the situation different?
Yeah, it's different. See, in the sense, the first was a competition between these two conglomerates. In Manipur, you must know that there are different tribes officially recognized, but non-officially, it is tend to be clubbed into broad two categories: the Nagas and the Kukis. But there were some tribes in that crisis that you have just mentioned in the 1990s. There were some tribes who doesn't want to be dragged into these two groups. They said we are neither Nagas nor Kukis. We are our own tribe. For example, there is a ST group called the IMODs, and they said we are not part of these things. So everybody was this violence is dragged into these competitions. So they had this almost a genocidal or ethnic cleansing, and many people use this term, by the way. Incidentally, the cookies will be marking, this is the 30th year of what they call it Black September, remembering citizens, ordinary people who killed in that, cookie people killed in that. It is the 30th year, in fact, they are going to mark it. Come September, they will have this in memory of that class. So here, the difference is, those days it is between the ST groups. And now this is the same group, Kuki, who were once fighting with the Nagas, now is fighting with the Meiteis. So in the earlier case, the Meiteis from the valley played a proactive role to bring peace between the two groups. Now that Meiteis has been implicated and is a party to this conflict, so who's going to deal with it? So that kind of a thing, there is the differences. And there are other differences in terms of, the conflict, there has more deeply to do with the nationalist or ethno-nationalist movement led by these political armed groups involved in line with their politics, and there was that kind of a thing. But this time, you do not have that. It is more like a discontent with the state. The state policies about forests, about the ST demand and the response of the judiciary to that, and the state governments. So there is a slightly different dynamics. Besides the fact that it is no longer between the two tribal groups, but between a non-tribal and tribal, so to speak, as we understand today. So in that sense, there is a difference. And I'm afraid that the consequence of this violence will transform the nation. I'm sure that some are aware of this. It is not Naga-Kuki conflict. It's between Meiteis who have this memory of being a part and parcel of an evolution of a state, who have this sense of being boxed in and been deprived, by these things, and their villages have been burned, and that's why part of the reaction you see is going to be very different, and that's my fear. There are other implications of this, and how larger politics in South Asian politics, in the rest of the country, the political dynamics going to get implicated here now, and realignment of loyalties and so on, so that it's going to be far more radical transformation than the Kuki-Naga clashes of the 1990s. And I hope I'm wrong, but all the writings are on board. The way that, especially Meiteis, political shift, their thinking process. They have been talking about peaceful coexistence and so on. So the Meiteis will have among themselves a huge task whether they will be still maintaining that posture or certain kind of new ethos of thinking will transform the relationship between how different communities see each other. And as I said, writings are on the wall. So there are different consequences we will follow now. So in that sense, this is different.
My last question is that what should be the way forward, and what role should the state government play? How should the civil society intervene?
No, this is what I'm saying, unfortunately our political class, I've told you, but they could have done so much over the years. But I realize that they have their own character, class character. So their interest, access to the wealth and part of the state is far more important than the life of the ordinary citizens. And many of these, they also know that many of these groups can be their hand in glove with them. And this is the ordinary citizen. It's sad to see these young educated people so charged up. These narratives played by this instrumentality of a class interest and fallen victim to that. Rather than standing up, my generation, we can't sacrifice to that. We will decide our own destiny. We live in this part. We'll try to find it out. And globally, all over the world, people talk about post-national order, globalizations. You are fighting like an old 19th century nationalists in 21st century. That's amazing for me. This speaks volumes about your education and consciousness. So the first thing is, I wish this younger generation realized whatever I've shared with you, how this is that divisionary tactics. You are not allowed to see into the truth of the matter. You are consumed by emotions and your rationality, whether you look through Christianity or any religion or Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, when he says God has given us this rationality to think what is good and what is bad. You're not able to utilize that, consumed by that emotion, hatred manufactured by this vested interest. And I think the day when these things should come, one of the things that I wish that among the student communities and intellectual class, they must first find a way to have a dialogue on this land. And Government of India must, if the state government doesn't do it, an inquiry commission must be instituted. I think that's immediate to fix responsibility so that nobody ever dares to do such kind of a dirty game. And then whoever the victim, I think the community must reach out to each other and then help. Otherwise, I've said it again, I'm saying it. You are inviting external forces to play the game behind you, and you think it is your choices, you are the one who is making, but it is the external forces which is making you to choose, do certain kind of thing. So you lose your agency and right to self-determination to decide your own life. And you live in that small part of the world. And then they must realize this. And I think that civil society, we have very weak civil society. It's a top-down. It's not rooted in some people, you must have heard this, a frontal organization. The leadership is not coming up because you are married to the people and it is your free discourse. And it is the top-down imposed leadership from the top. So it is rooted in the conflict situation. So civil society, that's why it collapsed. When civil society is stronger, such kind of violence normally don't happen. And now the civil society is already, earlier our nature of civil society is very weak, and all the more weaker now because of various forces. We don't have a genuine civil society, so to speak. So I think the step must be taken, especially by the young students and journalists, academics, professionals like doctors, engineers. They must become an active member of the civil society. They are the civil society. They should not forget that. They are the civil society. They can shape whatever the political class is to run. A genuine civil society to create, it should not be a theory. Political class, their days will be limited once the people are awakened to this. And I think it is in their own interest, the politicians, especially of the state, that to have an active people in civil society and to be a political leader of that society is a blessing for them. They don't have to wait for the external forces to decide their destiny. They will be able to take on their destiny with close ties with the people. And I think that's kind of an awareness I want them to bring.
Today, sir.
It's my pleasure.
We do hope that the violence in Manipur comes to an end and ways to coexist peacefully are found sooner. Thank you.